Do you know, even Noddy's Christmassy today. Now, if you want to wish somebody a happy Christmas, maybe somebody in hospital, then please call us or fax us now. The phone number is 0181 811 8181. We have somebody answering your calls. We want to wish as many people a happy Christmas as possible. But now a very special panto-style Jackanory with Rik Mayall. It's Jack and the Beanstalk.
Jackanory. I'll tell you a story. And now the story's begun.
Once upon a time, there was me. What an exciting beginning. Yes! Me, my name's Jack Twaddle. And my mother's Mrs. Twaddle. And she walks with a waddle. She used to be a model. Once upon a time, before I was famous, we lived together in a tumble-down cottage, along with Duchess Daisy the Fourth, our chocolate-coloured cow with googly eyes. My mother wasn't rich. In fact, she was poor. And every day she got poorer and poorer. "Jack," said my mother, "there's only one thing for it. You must sell Duchess Daisy the Fourth at the market. But however much they offer to pay, make 'em double it. That's the Twaddle way." So, I saddled up Duchess Daisy the Fourth, our chocolate-coloured cow with the googly eyes, and I rode her off down a cindery path, which leads from our tumble-down cottage towards the market town of Market Down. As we rolled merrily along, I sang Daisy this beautiful song. To market, to sell a fat cow. Home again, any old how. Oh. But Duchess Daisy the Fourth didn't seem to like my song. She rolled back her googly eyes and she bucked and bucked with her chocolate-coloured back, and I flew through the air and landed on my bum. Ow! But when I looked up, I saw a thin grey man. And he said to me in a thin grey way, "I'm a sort of a farmer, and my desire is to own such a cow. So let me buy her." And he opened his skinny grey right hand, and I saw he was holding 99 beans, all different colours. "Look here," he said, "I've a deal for you now. I'll give you all these fine beans for your cow." "Double it," I said. He opened his skinny grey left hand, and I saw he was holding 99 more beans, all different colours. 99 beans and 99 beans, said the thin grey man, who was sort of a farmer. "Done and done," I shouted, and I held out my cap, and he filled it with beans. And then he glided away, leading Duchess Daisy the Fourth, and I galloped home happily, clutching my cap full of wonderful beans. "Mother," I said, "I've sold Duchess Daisy. A thin grey man offered me a handful of beans, but I remembered what you told me, and I made him double it." "Jack Twaddle," she said, "you are a champion fool!" And she kicked my cap high into the air, so the wonderful beans fell all over our garden. And she picked up our trusty old, rusty old hatchet and chased me 33 times round the cottage. And I only escaped because of her waddle. That night, I was suddenly woken up by a tap, tap, tapping at my window. I jumped out of bed, but when I looked out, all I could see was great big bean leaves. I ran downstairs into the garden. My wonderful beans had taken root, and they were sending up shoot after shoot, and the shoots had grown into stalks, tough as leather, hairy stalks, all winding and weaving together. I looked up and up, but the top of that beanstalk was lost in the clouds. "Better climb up this one, Jack, and see where it takes you," I said courageously to myself. And as I began to climb, I started to sing. "Climb the tallest beanstalk till you reach the sky. Climb the tallest beanstalk, never asking why. Up you go and up you go, clamber up that green stalk, through the sunshine and the snow, slooping up the beanstalk. Higher and higher, round and round, so high I couldn't see the ground. But I thought of Mother and kept on climbing. I'd been climbing for 7 hours when I realised I'd reached the top of the beanstalk. I was standing in strange, hot, desert country. I began to walk over a dusty old hill. And suddenly, I saw an enormous castle carved from the living rock. I marched boldly over the drawbridge and gave the huge door a heavy, great knock. The huge door creaked open, and standing there was a small, blue-eyed woman with flame-red hair. "Good morning," she said. "They call me Mrs. G." "I'm Jack Twaddle," I said. "I'm going to be famous before I'm dead. But meanwhile, I need food and drink and a bed." "Well, that's easy, Jack Twaddle," she said. "Come on in. We don't get many visitors at Castle Grim. She led me through many an enormous room, which echoed like caverns and smelled like the tomb. They were hung with great bludgeons and swords and shields and paintings of bloodthirsty battlefields. She led me round an iron grating in the floor. Way down below it, I heard a low roar of sighing and moaning and crying and groaning. What are those voices and who do they call? Well, I don't hear anything at all. What are those voices? Listen harder. Oh, that must be the creatures in my husband's larder. Well, it's a wonderful castle, I said politely. I wonder why you don't get more visitors. Oh, I really don't know, she said. But perhaps it's because my husband is a very cruel giant who's extremely partial to people meat. People meat, I said. I'm people. Suddenly, there was a loud knocking at the gate. So loud that the whole castle shook. Mrs. G opened the oven door. "Quick, hide in here," she said, and bustled off to let her husband in. As soon as that giant walked into the castle, I could hear his footsteps. It's like a mammoth's, and hear his breathing. Like a dragon's. And as he stood in the doorway of the kitchen, I heard him sniff deeply through hairy nostrils and heard his voice sing out like an earthquake. "Fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread." Well, I thought I was doomed to be Jack the hot dog. But then I heard Mrs. G tell the giant, "That's not an Englishman's blood you smell. That's your prisoners down in their dungeon cell." I peered very bravely out of the oven, and the giant sat chewing a cow bone or two, till Mrs. G brought a bowl of gruesome stew, which is far too disgusting for me to describe. And when he had finished golloping it down, he called out, "Kind Mrs. G, sweet Mrs. G, bring my rainbow-feathered hen to me." And Mrs. G opened a wooden coop in the wall and took out a hen with feathers of every colour. And then she went into the garden to catch caterpillars for pudding. And the giant whispered to the hen, "The world is young, the world is old. Lay me an egg of solid gold." And the rainbow-feathered hen raised her beak, and she gave 7 clucks, a croak and a squeak, shook her rear quarters and stretched each leg, and sat down and laid a solid gold egg. The giant patted the hen and petted the hen, but he was full of that gruesome stew, and soon he fell asleep with his head on the table. Snoring like a jumbo jet. I squeezed boldly out of the oven door, clambered up the table leg, grabbed the rainbow-feathered hen, dodged out the kitchen, past the dungeon larder, through the enormous rooms with their horrible paintings, out of the door, over the drawbridge, across the desert, down the Beanstalk and home to our tumble-down cottage. Well, said my mother, Mrs. Twaddle, have you had a nice day, Jack? Look, Mum, I told her, we're going to be rich. And I stuck the rainbow-feathered hen on our kitchen table and sang in a voice as beautiful as marshmallows. The world is young, the world is old. Lay me an egg of solid gold. And the rainbow-feathered hen raised her beak. She gave 7 clucks, a croak and a squeak, and shook her rear quarters and stretched each leg, and Mum said, she's laid us a solid gold egg. Every morning I sang that little poem, and every morning another gold egg to sell at the market in Market Down. Those golden eggs brought us a pretty penny. But a pretty penny is easily spent. And one day, when the rainbow-feathered hen stopped laying, we discovered our piggy bank was empty. So I thought for a bit, and then I thought for a bit longer, and I knew I had to go back to the giant's castle. My mother, Mrs. Twaddle, who walks with a waddle, said, Jack, don't go, you're all I've got. I don't want you stewed in a cooking pot. But I smiled a brave smile, and I said, oh no, it's up the Beanstalk, Jack must go. And she said, oh, all right then. But before I went, I thought another thought. I thought that Mrs. G won't let me in the castle, in case I nick any more of the giant's treasures. So I'll disguise myself as a beautiful princess. I bought myself a sparkly necklace and a fine blonde wig and an elegant dress with silver frogs on. And I looked a dream, though I say it myself. And it was, climb the tallest beanstalk till you reach the sky. Climb the tallest beanstalk, never asking why. Right to the top of the beanstalk again. And tiptoed over that dusty old hill up to that enormous castle, carved from the living rock. I strolled over the drawbridge in my Diamante high-heeled sneakers and gave the door a knock. Tit-tit-tit-plip-plip. The huge door creaked open, and standing there was that small blue-eyed woman with the flame-red hair. But she said, go straight home, my dear. We don't want any more callers round here. For a poor hungry boy called the other day, Jack Twaddle. He stole our sweet hen away. Do I look like a poor hungry boy? I exclaimed regally. Do I look as if my name is Jack Twaddle? My name is Princess Deborah, and I walk like a zebra. And I demonstrated my royal walk. Oh, I'm sorry, Your Majesty. Do come in. We have few royal visitors at Castle Grimgrin. I do like your elegant dress with the silver frogs. She led me through those enormous rooms, past those bright and terrible paintings, and past the grating of the giant's dungeon larder, and finally into the great kitchen. And suddenly there was a loud knocking at the gate, so loud that the whole castle shook. Mrs. G opened the wood cupboard door. Climb in quickly, Your Majesty, she said. Then she bustled off to let her husband in. Fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread. Well, I thought I was doomed to be a princess burger. But then I heard Mrs. G tell the giant, that's not an Englishman's musty stink. That's my dirty frying pans in the sink. Peeping out of the wood cupboard, I could see that Mrs. G brought him a dish of revolting soup, which is too sickening for me to explain out loud. And when he had finished golloping it down, he called out, Dear Mrs. G, Sweet Mrs. G, bring my bag of clever money to me. The giant's wife placed on the table in front of him a red canvas bag printed with the words clever money. Then she went upstairs to collect cobwebs for a salad. Out of the bag tumbled, one by one, 10 golden coins as bright as the sun. The giant whispered to them, franc, pound, dollar, rupee, yen, multiply yourselves by 110. And suddenly, the whole kitchen was bright with the shining of 1,100 golden coins. The giant played with his gold, and he sniffed his gold, and he licked his gold as well. But his belly was full of that revolting soup, and soon he fell asleep with his head on the table, snoring like a bulldozer. I sneaked gallantly out of the wood cupboard and clambered up the table leg. But there were far too many coins to carry away. So I whispered to the clever money, franc, pound, dollar, rupee, yen, divide yourselves by 110. Right away, there were only 10 gold coins on the table. So I stuffed them into the clever money bag, picked up the bag, dodged out the kitchen, past the dungeon larder, through the enormous rooms with their horrible paintings, out the door, over the drawbridge, across the desert, down the Beanstalk, and home to our tumble-down cottage. Well, said my mother, Mrs. Twaddle, have you had a nice day, Jack? Look, Mum, I told her, we're going to be rich again. I plonked the clever money bag on our kitchen table, and I said, in a voice as lovely as a lollipop, franc, pound, dollar, rupee, yen, multiply yourselves by 10,010. And the clever money bag started to shake and quake, and then fountains and mountains of golden money flooded our kitchen, and then our whole cottage, and then our garden, and out into the street. And the neighbours came running, and the police, and they were asking us, where did the money come from? And there were reporters too, asking about the Beanstalk, and why I was wearing a blondie wig and a princess dress, and what about the silver frog's den? Until I panicked and shouted out, yen, franc, dollar, rupee, pound! Go to a place where you'll never be found! And lo and be blimey, Charlie, said my mum, our clever money's all vanished away! So the neighbours went home, and the police drove away, and even the reporters lost interest. And me and my mum, Mrs. Twaddle, who walks with a waddle, were just as poor as ever. So I said, all right, both of us know it's up the Beanstalk Jack must go. But before I went, I thought another brainy thought and disguised myself as a horror-yucky witch. And I looked a nightmare, though I say it myself. And so it was, climb the tallest beanstalk till you reach the sky, right to the top of the beanstalk again. And I sidled wickedly across the drawbridge and gave the door a nasty knock. The huge door creaked open, and standing there was the small blue-eyed woman with the flame-red hair. Visitors banned, she announced with a roar. Not long ago I helped a princess. Her name was Princess Deborah, and she walked like a zebra, but she stole one of my husband's greatest treasures. Do I look like a princess? I snarled. Take care! I'm the Wicked Witch of Weston-super-Mare. My name's Priscilla, and I walk like a gorilla. Should I put some vicious spell on you? Turn you into monkey jam or cobra glue? Now, Mrs. G was scared of bad magic, so she shivered and shook. But she said, do come in. Few midnight hags visit us at Castle Grim-Grin. It's such a pleasure to meet a magical personality. She led me through those enormous rooms, past the terrible paintings and the dungeon larder, and into the great kitchen. And suddenly, there was a loud knocking at the gate. So, Mrs. G opened the laundry basket. "Oh, climb in, wicked witch of Western Supermare," she said. And then she bustled off to let her husband in. Fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread. I'll be served up as witch pizza, I thought. But then I heard Mrs. G tell the giant, "That's not an Englishman, I think. That's the castle sewers. You know how they stink." And gazing out of the laundry basket, I could see that Mrs. G brought him a dish of foulness pie, whose recipe includes rat's tails and the eyeballs of octopuses. Ugh. And when he'd finished golloping it down, he called out, "Oh, Mrs. G, lovely Mrs. G, bring my enchanted harp to me." And the giant's wife placed the harp on the table in front of him. And then she went downstairs to collect shadows to weave into a ball gown. The giant whispered to it, "The world is old, the world is young. Play me the songs my mother sung." And the enchanted harp began to play. It played that giant an old lullaby from his childhood.
Sweet baby giant, little do you know, soon you're going to grow and grow and grow. Sweet baby giant, darling, don't you weep. Dream that you are tiny and smile in your sleep.
And the giant smiled and hummed along with the tune, and soon he was fast asleep. I pulled off my disguise, jumped out of the laundry basket heroically, and grabbed the enchanted harp. But as I reached the door, the harp cried out to the giant.
Master, I'm being stolen!
And the giant jumped up and started to chase me. Being hunted by a giant is totally terrifying, but not if you're a fearless fellow like me. He chased me out of the kitchen, past the dungeon larder, through the enormous rooms with their horrible paintings, out of the door, across the drawbridge, and over the desert towards the Beanstalk. I could hear the giant's belly rumbling like thunder. His great hand caught me by the collar, but thanks to my mother's awful sewing, the collar ripped off as I jumped into the topmost branches of the Beanstalk. The giant began to climb down after me, clumsily but surely, roaring for revenge. As soon as I landed in my mother's garden, I put down the enchanted harp and picked up our trusty old rusty old hatchet. I could see the giant high up on the beanstalk, clambering down to get me and eat me. I swung that hatchet, hacking at the beanstalk close to the roots. High up in the air, the giant clung on to the beanstalk as it began to sway. First, a little sway, a little wave, then a big sway, a long way, and then a creaking, breaking crack of doom sound, and the beanstalk toppled. And the beanstalk fell, with the giant clinging onto it. And the giant was dead. The funeral of a giant is very expensive. Me and my mother had to pay. So we sold the enchanted harp to the British Museum of Magic for oodles of dosh. 3 oodles, in fact. And we sent 1 oodle to Mrs. G, who freed all the prisoners in the larder dungeon. And she married one of them, a handsome Scottish poet. They run the castle as a bed and breakfast. We found the thin, grey sort of a farmer and used another of our oodles to buy back Duchess Daisy IV, our chocolate-coloured cow with the googly eyes. And that left us an oodle of our very own. And so everybody lived happily ever after. Except the giant.
I'll tell you a story about Jackanory. And now my story's begun. I'll tell you another Jack and his brother. And now my story is done. It's done.
What a brilliant Jackanory.